I was excited for this one. So today we're going to chat about how Jesus reconciles as prophet, priest, and king. All right. This is, you could say, one of the hinge points, I guess, of Christianity, of Christian orthodoxy. Now, what I mean by that is, this is kind of the door on which everything hinges. This is so important. So it's important then to get it right. Because if you get it wrong, it actually means that the whole door is going to be rickety and it's not going to be working properly. And I would wager that a lot of people, not to say that they have a bad understanding of Jesus, but maybe just an early one. And it's really helpful to always get more and more sophisticated in the way that you approach Jesus. And so the more you do that, the healthier your own faith and spirituality becomes. So why prophet, priest, and king? Well, the early church noticed that Jesus seemed to fit in these roles very well. Now, the book of Hebrews does this a lot and talks about Jesus in this capacity, but so does the Apostle Paul. And even in the Gospels, Jesus kind of seems to operate in these three ways as prophet, priest, and king. Now, you can't understand these terms unless you understand how they're used in the Hebrew Scriptures. And a lot of people are secretly Marcionite. And by Marcionite, I mean they are people that tend to read only the New Testament and neglect and maybe even push aside the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. But actually, all of that gives a lot of background to the New Testament and its vocabulary. And so if you never take time to understand how the Hebrew Scriptures talks about prophet, priest, and king, then maybe you'll never approach talking about Jesus in those ways, if that makes sense. Well, so then let's break these three down, and then we'll talk about how Jesus is a savior. So the Greek word soter, and I've translated it into English lettering, transliterated it actually. The word savior means savior, but it also means liberator and deliverer. So there's a few ways that this word can be translated, and they're actually all correct. You can't just focus on one because each nuance does something different. But in the early church, they took the Hebrew Scriptures, and to try to help some of their audience, they translated it into Greek. And so they used this word soter, which sometimes was used in light of or as an exchange for the word Messiah or Mashiach. Moses, in that Greek writing or translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, was called a soter. And so Moses was a savior and a liberator and a deliverer of the Israelite people. How cool is that? And so Jesus kind of fits this mold of being like a new and better Moses. The Gospel of Matthew actually really highlights that. Now, when we think about Jesus as a soter similar to Moses, it brings up so much. And then from Israelite history, we have Moses, and he helps to free the Israelites, right? But then as they go down through the ages, they need prophets and priests and kings to help them navigate this thing called the life of faith, right? Well, let's do one at a time, okay? When we say that Jesus is king, we mean that it's an echo of how Israel used to have kings. Who is it that you listen to? Who is it that helps guide the decisions of the kingdom? Who is it that establishes the rule and establishes what justice looks like? Not only justice, but who is it that establishes what mercy looks like? What does order look like? What does life together look like? And so a king is very important. But when we say that Jesus is king, how does Jesus as king reconcile? Which means to put things back together. Jesus reconciles as king in that he helps us to establish broken order, and also helps to establish and bring together our own fractured dignity and respect as just human beings. And so when we say Jesus is king, we also are inviting this whole understanding of royalty, and that actually through Jesus, we are invited to become this new royal humanity that has inherent dignity and value. And man, that's wonderful, right? So that's Jesus as king. What about as priest? Well, the Hebrew scriptures talk about priests are those that remind us that sacred exists. And the priests were the ones that would help to moderate and to mediate our relationship with God. Not to be in between in a bad way, but in the sense of helping us to remember that covenant, that there is promise, that there are such a thing as broken relationship with the divine, and then how it can be reestablished. Well, when we say that Jesus is priest, we mean that Jesus helps to reconcile us to our broken relationship with God, with covenant, with sacred things around us. And so, in many ways, priests are there to help reconnect us with spirituality, sure, but I really like saying with sacredness, with sanctity, with things around us that should be treated as holy. And so when we say that Jesus reconciles as priest, we mean, wow, he provided the offering that helped to alleviate our consciences and help us to understand that the broken relationship that we have with holy need not continue, and in fact does not continue. We'll talk more about that. But the prophets in the Hebrew scriptures, they're fascinating figures to me, because they are the ones that essentially call out Israel for being hypocrites, call them out for wearing a mask, call them out for not really caring about the things of God. It's like, yeah, you focus on church services, but you don't love justice. And so the prophets were profound. They always pointed people back towards, listen, the religion is not just about religion. The religion is actually about living well in this life and doing things properly and justly and walking humbly with God. So the prophets really, for lack of a better word, would often call people out on their bull plop. You know what I mean? So when we say that Jesus is a prophet, how does he reconcile as a prophet? Well, Jesus reconciles as a prophet in that he reconciles and pulls us back towards truth and towards justice. Remember, he flipped over tables. Remember, he told people, yeah, go pay taxes. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Give to God what is God's. When he tells people that they should live in truth, it happens a lot in the Gospel of John. There's lots of mentions of the word truth. Well, Jesus reconciles as a prophet in that sense. He reconciles us with truth, with justice, with these things that call us out for being fake. And so Jesus maybe helps us reconnect with the truth of who we are and truth of who God is and the truth about what justice looks like. That's what prophets are for. And I definitely think we misunderstand prophets today. Absolutely. Now, when we say that Jesus is a prophet, priest, and king, that's what we mean. And you can't understand prophet, priest, and king unless you understand what it means in the Hebrew scriptures as well. And so that's why it's important to bring in the Hebrew scriptures, which help us to understand Christ as Savior, Redeemer, Liberator, Deliverer, Reconciler. So let's close with this, all right? With just one single verse, well, paragraph, a couple verses. This is one of the most important paragraphs you could ever read about Jesus being a reconciler. So I'm going to put it up, I'm going to read it through, and you can read along. Here we go. This is from Colossians 1. Sometimes known as the Colossians hymn. Some people wonder if it was a song. Here we go. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Now, when we say that Jesus is reconciler, we mean this paragraph. And this paragraph helps us to understand Christ is the centerpiece, but also the start and the finish of all things. And as a result of that, he is concerned with reconciling all things. Now, pay attention to one thing. Let's read it really quickly and just notice how many times does the phrase all things happen. Here we go. I see, for in him all things were created, things in heaven, on earth, da, 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 da. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things altogether. He is the head of the body, the church. Da, 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 da. For God was pleased to have all his fullness in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things. Here is 5 verses that use the phrase all things 5 times. When we say that Jesus is a reconciler, we don't just mean of us individually. That is such a small scope. We have to recognize that the New Testament actually talks about Christ as being the reconciler of all things. And that's a mystery we have to lean into, but you know what? It's a good mystery. And not only that, we have to remember that Christ reconciles all things while fulfilling the role of prophet, priest, and king. So isn't that wonderful, right? So maybe this week, as you walk around, maybe remember that phrase, all things. Remember how often the Colossians hymn talks about it, and that it kind of hits its high point, that Christ is in all things, through all things, and to him all things happen, and to him all things exist, and they exist for him. But all of that happens, and as a result of it, and because of God's great love and mercy and freedom and love, God chooses to reconcile all things. So go back and read that verse. Go back and read that paragraph. Sit in it and maybe wrestle with it. Because if your understanding of Christianity does not include everything, then maybe we need to sit back and chat about it, right? But for now, let's also just sit in the beautiful revelation that Christ reconciles all things as a prophet, as a priest, as a king, but also as a God-man. All right? So that's all for today. Grace and peace to you, and have a lovely week. All right? Cheers.